Hi guys, welcome back to another video. So today's Valentine's Day, so what's better than to embarrass my own OCs? So I actually found this kind of blushing face meme earlier when I was looking for the expression memes, when I was looking for templates to draw all of my OCs in like little chibi forms. But I kind of saved this in the back pocket because I thought it would be fun to do as kind of like a little theme for Valentine's Day. So I picked two of my OCs today to draw. So the first one is my OC Masaki, who I tend to draw the most. So we'll be basically starting off with him first. I am going to be sketching on a new layer on top of the overall canvas. I also sized up the entire meme to I think about 3000 rather than the very small size resolution that it was initially saved as. But because of that, the quality of it is a little bit fuzzy with the lines and some of the text. So I do apologize about that, but I wanted to keep the integrity of the meme as is, or like the template of it. So I didn't want to retouch it in any other way. So we're just going to be drawing on top of it instead. I'll make sure to link where I found apparently this is like the translated version. The original one was in Japanese and it was translated onto, I think a person uploaded it on DeviantArt, but the original is from Pixiv. So I'll make sure to link both of them down below if you wish to use them. So I'm gonna be basically showing a lot of sped up footage or like time-lapse footage for the majority of the process for today, just because I spent probably way too long on both of the templates. And the reason being is that there were some boxes where I felt I didn't really know what to draw for their specific term. So one of them is curt. I didn't know how to do I guess more like a curt expression alongside with being like flushed or having blushing. And then the other one I had problems with is counter. So I was not sure what exactly counter meant. So you'll see how I decide to interpret it for both Masaki, and I didn't mention who I was drawing for the second person. So I'll be drawing my OC Kaisen for the second portion. I'll also make sure to link any of the brushes that I like to use for this particular, I guess like the sketches and the line work for today, because there's two particular brushes that I've been using. One is the Froggy pencil, which is I'm using for the sketch portion, and then I'm using, I don't really remember the name of it, but it's like a particular pen that's mostly used, I think, for like sketching and inking. So I will link those down below if you guys are interested in it. So we kind of hit the counter box for this blushing meme. So for Masaki's version, I decided that I would just interpret it as the Uno reverse card, because honestly, I don't know if it's supposed to be like the character's supposed to make the person on the other end, like I guess us as the viewer is the person who's supposed to be blushing, but I don't think Masaki's that type, so I decided to just make him hold awkwardly the Uno reverse card, and then we will move on to Kaisen. So unfortunately, because he is still very fresh and new as an OC for me, I do not draw him very consistently. You could argue that Masaki has some, I guess like some of the boxes that are very inconsistent, but that's just me making a bunch of mistakes. But for Kaisen, I was kind of like partially trying to flesh him out as I started to sketch. So I tried my best to make the very first one, which is averting eyes, to be kind of like my test subject. So I was trying my best to draw him as accurately as I could. I also had my sketchbook open because it's the only place that I had a drawing of him that I think is what I want him to look like. But as I draw him more and more for this particular little blushing meme, he gets very, I guess, kind of like more condensed and round in terms of his hair. And how I've drawn it in my sketchbook and how I prefer his hair to be is to kind of like flare out and kind of be a little bit more fluffy and floofy rather than it kind of sticking to the dome of his head. So I am going to add an extra illustration at the very end that will hopefully better represent what he's supposed to look like, and hopefully I'll draw him more consistently in the future. But for now, he's still kind of in that weird phase of me starting to get kind of like getting used to his design overall. So until I can get comfortable drawing him and finding my own shortcuts to remember how I want to draw him, you'll probably be seeing him quite a bit as I'm kind of fumble my way through trying to get to that point. So for both Masaki and for Kaisen, I tried my best to, well, I think it helped that Masaki was drawn first, and I'm a little bit more confident in what kind of personality he has. He's a little bit more cutesy, more bubbly, a little bit more friendly in a sense. But for Kaisen, he's a little bit more, I don't know if he's gonna be like standoffish or a little bit more neutral, kind of deadpan-ish. So I didn't want him to be overly exaggerated for his expressions. So I tried my best to make sure that there wasn't too much of heavy overlap between their reactions to the different emotions. So now that we have the sketch kind of done, I'm gonna show you guys a quick clip of something that I was sketching earlier. So because there's so many boxes for that blushing meme, and I don't want to have to do the line art and color every individual box to a full degree, I kind of resort back to what I was kind of experimenting earlier before I started drawing the blushing meme, which is practicing inking a little bit more and doing a little bit more cell shading that's either monochromatic or just black and white. So I have this example of Kaisen that I did really quickly. Feel free to pause here if you want to read what I posted here, because it'll have a better explanation of what I'm trying to demonstrate. But basically, I wanted to practice inking a little bit more and get more familiar with it, and I kind of stumbled upon the setting that's under the adjust speed. To do a very brief rundown, the one on the left is basically the slower you go, the more stabilization you get, and then the one on the right is you get the same amount of stabilization that you have already set, but the faster you go, it reduces the stabilization, which I find very useful because more recently I've been having the habit of doing a little bit of hatching or shorter strokes whenever I do, let's say, like eyes, or like I said, whenever I do hatching after doing some like blockier areas that are filled with black. And I always hated switching back and forth the stabilization to do my quicker strokes, because doing quicker strokes with the stabilization just makes them very short and choppy. But with this setting set to reduce stabilization when doing faster strokes, makes it a lot easier for me to not have to switch back and forth on my stabilization. So as we are working on the line work, so I am going to be doing line work for all of the boxes for both Masaki and Kaisen. So I made a new layer on top of my sketch, lowered my sketch down so I can kind of just like barely see it so that I can worry about inking. And I guess like it's kind of a habit for me that sometimes I sketch very simple or very rough, and I rely a lot on doing the line work with more detail. So oftentimes when I'm doing like Masaki's hair and stuff, I'm following some of the lines very closely, but oftentimes I'm adding extra things here and there, like extra hair strands. I'm adding more details to the eyes. I might make small adjustments, and I find it a lot easier to do that if I have my sketch opacity to be very, very low. So hopefully you guys can still see it and that the inking isn't too boring to watch. I wish I had my camera set up in a more ideal spot so that we could have done real-time inking, because I know a lot of people find inking very satisfying. But at this point, until I can get my setup a little bit more proper, I'll try my best to see if I can film my screen next time if I ever do more inking like this in the future. Also, small heads up, if you decide to use the same inking pen that I'm using, which is like this Korean type of pen, it automatically sets your inks to black, so feel free to change your colors of your line work afterwards by alpha locking or layer clipping a new layer to change the color, because like I said, the brush will automatically set your color to black no matter what color you choose. It will show up as black on your canvas, so you can just change that afterwards if you need to adjust it, which I will do eventually at the very end. So when I was doing kind of like the small sketch or the experimental sketch that I did before doing this blushing face meme, I also decided that I was going to do this particular style with screen tone, and I was trying my best to not add too much shading here and there. But because Masaki's hair is a bit more on the mid-tone side, I decided to add a little bit of like a band of shadow across his hair, so I knew where to place highlights later. But for Kaisen, you're gonna see that I'm not gonna add any at all, and I kind of approach his inking a little bit differently from how I did Masaki's inking. I also ended up not really adding the details to the Uno reverse card. I'm gonna do that during the coloring portion just because I didn't think the lines were necessary for the cards. But now we are moving on to Kaisen's line work. So I mentioned earlier that I kind of did his line work a little bit differently to how I did Masaki's. So for the most part, I don't think it was necessary. to do his inking differently, especially for the hair. I think the eyes made it a little bit easier for me to kind of like adjust it if I need to, if I did them a little bit more blank compared to how I did Masaki's, where I ended up coloring the inside with like hatching and then I added the highlight automatically. But for Kaisen, because his eyes are going to be a little bit smaller, I didn't want them to look too busy, so I decided that I would just end up leaving them blank other than the pupil, and then when we get to the coloring portion, I'll kind of like separate it into kind of like 3 different sections. But in terms of what I omitted from Kaisen's versus Masaki's, for Masaki's I mentioned that I did kind of like that band of shadow for the hair, which is kind of like these scratchy marks across his hair. And when I was doing Kaisen's, the reason why I didn't do that was because I thought I was just gonna like bucket fill his hair to be one solid color and kind of chip away to get my highlights. And technically I am still gonna do that. But the difference is that I'm not going to use the same color as my line work to fill in his hair, so it won't be like a one solid color, it will be a lighter color. So technically I could have added those scratchy marks across his hair similar to the way I did Masaki's, but in the end I didn't really do that. I definitely think like kind of looking back at the footage and just looking at the overall finished drawing meme of the blushing faces, I do think Kaisen's and Masaki's, there are some that are a little bit more exaggerated to the point where it might seem slightly out of character for the boys. So for Masaki, I did mention that he's a little bit more bubblier, on the cuter side, he's more happier, a little bit more friendlier, but I don't think he's like that much more expressive, I guess, in a way. I feel like he's just like happy, more calm demeanor, but not exactly like very bubbly. I don't know how exactly to describe it, but hopefully in the future I'll be able to flesh him out more as well, like personality wise, just because even though I draw him a lot, I feel like I didn't really flesh him out that much in general. So the line art is done. I decided to hide the background and I decided to also kind of fill in the borders a little bit for certain parts of both Masaki and Kaisen so that I could do in kind of like an inverted fill. So I selected everywhere around the characters, inverted the fill so that it will be easier for me to fill just the characters rather than individually bucketing each section. So I decided to lay down a kind of peachy pink color for the kind of like the base, but I end up alpha locking that and setting it to white so that we can kind of keep white of the canvas or white of the template to be the main source for the lightest part of both of the boys. After that, I went ahead and made new layers for 2 different tones. So I did one that is like a softer pink and one that's a little bit more of a darker pink for both Masaki and Kaisen, but I am going to keep their colors a little bit separate. So for Masaki, it's a bit more on like that peachy kind of pink side. For Kaisen, it is going to be a little bit more dull and a little bit darker, but still kind of in that red area. But you're going to see that I'm going to kind of play around with the colors that I use for him. I thought it'd be kind of cute to keep it simple, and because I didn't really want to do black and white for all of them and to kind of fit the theme for Valentine's Day, I decided that I wanted to use pink and kind of more like dark reddish maroon, or maybe like a dark burgundy wine red-ish color for the lines, just because it's a little bit more fitting for the occasion, I guess. And I think it just looks cute overall, and I don't really have to worry about like, I guess like black and white would have looked nice, but this is like a way that I can kind of keep it simple and cute without needing to think about which colors I need to be put in which area, even though it would have been easy to make Masaki's just like probably like brown and blue of some sort to fill in his entire kind of like color palette. But for the layers, I mentioned that I have 2 layers for the kind of like the darker pink and the lighter pink. But for the highlights, I kind of just chipped away with the eraser tool to make the band of highlights rather than adding white. After that, I made another new layer to do the majority of the blushing for each of the different little boxes, just because I wanted it to be kind of placed on top of everything, just because there's some areas that have a little bit more of overlap. So I did end up doing that. There's not really that much blushing for this counter one for Masaki, but I think, I don't know, you guys can let me know what you think counter is. I don't know if it's like due to the translation or I just didn't understand what counter meant. So I didn't mention it earlier either. So for Kaisen's counter, I interpret it a little bit more like the reverse. So like he's supposed to be wooing you rather than you embarrassing him in that sense. So I don't know if it came across that way, but that's what I kind of attempted to do. But moving on to Kaisen's color blocking. So I did his differently in terms of instead of doing each individual panel on its own, I decided to fill in all of his hair all at once and then do the highlights, because then I didn't really have to go back and forth. But that means that my mini view that you guys can see on the kind of like upper left-ish area, sometimes it lags behind because I kind of forgot to move it along as I was working on certain ones. But I think this was an easier method to kind of keep them all consistent. And Kaisen has a lot more, I guess, like darker areas because his hair is supposed to be black. His majority of his like top is supposed to be black because he has like a black, I guess like you can consider it kind of like a cardigan or like a modern day kimono jacket or like shawl or something over top of a black shirt. So a lot of his is mostly one flat color, and I'm kind of chipping away to get those white areas for highlights. And then for shadows for the skin and any other areas, including the eyes, I was trying my best to block them in with a kind of like more mid-tone dark pink-ish color, which eventually I will change because I liked this combination initially, but at the end I thought it didn't look too fitting for the theme, even though I think it fits him very well. I ended up changing it to be much brighter, which you're gonna see during the time-lapse portion, but it was too bright for even me to look at, so I decided to dim it back down and make it a lot more, I guess, like muted, similar to how I have it currently, and I think it fits a lot better. So for his eyes, I did separate them into two different sections and added the highlight afterwards, so there was no need for the line work. And I think it would have worked nicely with Masaki's, but at this point I didn't want to restart and just like erase his eyes, so I just left it as is with the inking. But I think some of them look kind of cute as they were as I inked them, because I do like when eyes look very detailed, so it's kind of giving that illusion. And last but not least, we have Kaisen, and I do apologize that if this color burns your eyes, it's not going to be the final color, but hopefully you guys enjoyed today's video and watching me kind of fill out this little, I guess, like blushing face meme. I'm going to show you guys the time lapses as well, and I'll make sure to put kind of like the finished images at the very end, but stick around till the very end if you wish to see kind of like a bonus drawing of Kaisen, because I wanted to draw something more accurate to how I view him, and I feel like it's his hair and his overall look looks more akin to the sketch that I had in my sketchbook rather than to my very inconsistent drawing of him in the meme template, because now that I'm looking back, it looks like a bunch of different characters. Even Masaki looks out of character every so often how I drew him, so highly recommend if you have references of your OCs and you're drawing them. I think it's best to have them open if you want to have consistency, let's say for a comic, or if you're drawing a character over and over again. It's just helpful to have. I'm probably gonna end the voiceover right here, but if you wish to stick to the end to see the Kaisen drawing, I will also post it probably on my Twitter and my Instagram. But I'll talk to you guys next time in the next video. Bye! And happy Valentine's Day, by the way.